Imagine the shock of realizing a superpower is on the brink, out of cash, out of soldiers, out of fresh ideas. That's the revelation NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte dropped in London, reshaping Western eyes on Russia's war machine. Vladimir Putin's regime seemed invincible at the start, with endless manpower, resources, and factories ready to crush Ukraine. Early blunders aside, Russia looked set for victory in a grueling standoff as 2023 dawned.
But now?
Battlefield whispers tell of frantic desperation, with Ukraine's triumphs chipping away at Russia's core.
The turning point?
Pokrovsk, that eastern Donbass lifeline Moscow bled months to claim.
Russian forces retreated miles, pounded by artillery echoes.
Mid-September 2025 exposed the horror. Units of soldiers marked by HIV, hepatitis, and other deadly illnesses stormed in, armbands a grim warning.
Was this Russia's low point, weaponizing the sick to terrify Ukrainians?
Dmytro Zhmylo, head of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center, verified their frontline role near Pokrovsk's hellfire.
If Moscow stoops to this for momentum, is their army truly exhausted, literally and figuratively gasping? Fast forward to that nightmare, Pokrovsk's siege mirrors Russia's failing summer push.
Since late August, about 16,000 Russian troops, the echoes of their screams fading into mud and blood, have fallen, killed or broken.
Massive assaults yielded inches, not the crack of collapsing defenses.
Small Russian squads, 200 soldiers slipping past lines into the city's shadowed streets, met fierce holds and heavy tolls.
The air reeks of gunpowder residue, skin stinging from cold sweat amid firefights. Yet Ukraine isn't just hunkering down. August buzzed with tales of reclaimed hamlets, stories streaming out like liberating gusts. Come October, the tide surged anew. The 141 ST Mechanized Brigade unleashed strikes across the region, the thunder of their advance reverberating. Estimates climb, Ukraine snatched back roughly 24 settlements.
Not colossal gains, the crunch of boots on gained soil still thrilling, but the message pierces.
What does it mean when the underdog flips the script, refusing to yield this heartbeat hub?
Ukraine pulses with untapped surprises, ready to strike back at rash Russian charges, but wait, the agony in Pokrovsk, where supposedly 40% of all clashes erupt, masks something farther afield.
Could the rot sprout from Ukraine's soil alone, or is it woven into Russia's flawed military creed in tangled global threads? Picture the doctrine's fracture, unfit for today's clashes, tangled in geopolitics. The invasion? Not the army's blueprint, but the FSB's gamble, that shadowy arm envisaging a swift 10-day takeover. No full blitz, just special operation fanfare, parades gleaming before the fight. Spare parts? Overlooked, maps from mid-tier commanders void of attack routes, just marches assuming no enemies bite. Why? FSB misread Ukraine's scars of corruption, capsized alliances, betting on open arms welcomes, echoing Crimea's grab a decade back. But the betrayal's sting ran deep, unmet. Plus, Russia's last big scrap? 80s echoes, Soviet might propping up industry. Post-empire. Easy wins like Georgia softened them, stripping mobilization gears. As one think tank noted, it fueled fatal optimism, collapsing when facts struck. Hit it hardest at Hostomel Airport, Kiev's edge. Russia's lone grand play, seize it, airdrop troops, march on the capital before dawn. 200 to 300 elite boarded 34 choppers from Belarus. Ukrainians countered, 200 conscripts from the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade fortified, armed with rifles, Soviet missiles, anti-tank gear, the metallic chill of weapons in hand. Shots downed Yak-38s and Mi-28s, chaos erupting like splintering metal. Ukraine jammed the strip with junked planes, barring landings, the acrid smoke, rotor whine. At first foe, Russians faltered, 18076 transports hauling troops from Pskov vanishing, rerouted home. The bus laid bare rusted thinking. Russia's army, generational Soviet holdovers, shunning change, no core NCO backbone linking brass to grunts. They replay old wars, mass hordes over smart moves. Clash adaptability? Zero. Rigid chains, trapping lower ranks from decisions. For Ukraine, years of NATO drills forged innovators exploiting Russia's predictable storms. Air supremacy? Unclaimed in this offense. Glide bombs followed in 2024, but Ukraine's layered shields grounded most flights early on. Sensory turmoil, the boom of bombardments, earth trembling under siege, the sharp tang of explosives lingering. And the deeper poison? Putin's two-decade purge of truths, crushing dissent. He proclaimed Ukraine as Russian kin. His 2021 manifesto foreshadowing doom. But critically, since then, can a leader blind himself and his nation steer clear of catastrophe, or is this the inevitable unraveling? What horrors await if the core delusions persist, twisting the world's fate? The air thickens with unspoken dread. Russia defaulted to defensive fantasies, pitched battles with NATO on home turf, mechanized waves and skies claiming dominance. Yet invading without that edge exposed chasms. Ukraine's NATO-honed agility shown, rapid shifts to Russian stumbles. Touch the fear in that rigidity, no improvisation, just predictable mayhem. Putin's reign choked information, enforcing illusions. Ukraine's legitimacy denied, dissent silenced. Fantasies of quick conquest birthed disaster. Envision the isolation, maps showing parades, not battles, hope trumping reality. The result? Doctrinal decay, industrial slack, economic burdens. Earlier, Georgia's wind-bred complacency, dissolving readiness. Now, in Ukraine, attrition devours resources. Mobilization lagged, supplies thin. FSB's hubris amplified blind spots, no Ukrainian unity, easy plunder. Dreams of parades masked operational voids. Hostomel magnified cracks, abandoned assaults, wasted lives. Technical terms echo, EFASB for Federal Security Service, the think tank's name, IEFRI. Voices hesitate, did we underestimate the cracks? The pause hangs, electric, as questions swirl, how did such a giant trip so hard? And will Ukraine's resilience expose more secrets, or is Putin's grip unbreakable? Echoes of failure ripple outward. Economically, sanctions bite deep. Draining treasuries. Geopolitically, allies waver, exposed dependencies fray. Manpower hemorrhages, ideas stale. Russia wasn't built for this grind, doctrine a relic. FSB miscalculations loom large. Ukraine's NATO ties yielded adaptability. Sensory barrage intensifies, distant cries of the wounded, metallic odor of blood-stained uniforms, icy winds over trenches. Rhetorical dagger, if a colossus can't evolve, who can? Can Russia architect recovery, or does doom loom larger? The tension builds. What unseen force will shatter the facade next, plunging all into unknown depths? Russia's military failures in Ukraine stem not just from battlefield setbacks, but from a flawed doctrine mismatched for modern warfare, intertwined with geopolitical and economic pressures. As analysts from IFRI point out, this led Moscow to cling to delusional strategies, evident in the early war phases where contingency plans vanished upon real-world resistance. The starkest proof unfolded at Hostomel Airport, mere miles from Kyiv, where an ambitious Russian operation crumbled under swift Ukrainian defense. Is Putin's Russia actually crumbling under the weight of its own delusions, driven by a security service that treats war like a covert game? Imagine the thunderous roar of rotors slicing through the dawn sky over Hostomel, the acrid stench of jet A fuel mixing with the damp earth as bewildered Russian troops arrive without a single plan beyond expecting parades. The bitter reality? Russia's invasion was masterminded not by its military generals, but by the FSB, Vladimir Putin's shadowy security apparatus. Putin dreamed of seizing Kyiv in just 10 days, dodging full-scale war for a special military operation orchestrated by spies, not soldiers. Victory parades were staged virtually before the first shots, beaming false confidence to the world about Russia's invincible might and global clout. But behind the curtain? No stockpiles of spare parts for prolonged fights. Captured maps from mid-level Russian commanders revealed no offensive directives, only naive orders to advance without bracing for foes. Why such recklessness? The FSB naively bet on Ukraine's fractured past. Reckoning corruption and internal strife would persist under President Zelensky, painting him as unstable and flip-flopping between Moscow and the West. Their dossier predicted Ukrainians welcoming Russian forces with open arms, echoing the bloodless snatch of Crimea years ago. Yet, they tragically underestimated the simmering fury from that annexation, the icy standoff that followed.
Picture the cold sweat of Ukrainian families recalling betrayed promises, the gnawing hunger for sovereignty fueling fierce resistance. Russia's last major engagement harks back to the 1980s Cold War era, when the Soviet Union dominated with unrivaled industrial backing. Post-1991 collapse, a cheap win in Georgia's 2008 clash bred overconfidence, dismantling nationwide mobilization and logistics routes. IFRI slams this as dreamy strategizing, brutally exposed when Ukraine's resolve shattered illusions mid-2022. What hidden rot in Moscow's war room could topple their entire empire, leaving them begging for scraps in a quagmire of their own making? As desperate generals override crumbling plans, will a single leaked whisper ignite the spark for total unraveling? The air grows thick with the metallic tang of failure, hearts pounding in anticipation. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte's bold words in London last week unleashed a storm of revelation, shaking the foundations of Western perceptions of Russia's crumbling war machine. He declared that Vladimir Putin's regime is depleting its funds, soldiers, and strategies, turning the Ukrainian conflict into a slow-motion collapse, not just a geopolitical gambit or blind optimism. At the invasion's dawn, Russia flexed its human resources, raw materials, and industry, poised to bulldoze through Ukraine. Yet, even as early plans unraveled into failures, Moscow held the edge in a grueling war of endurance that seemed destined for their win by 2023. But NATO's confidence now fractures, flooded by desperate battlefield whispers showing Ukraine's fight as a vortex devouring Russia from the inside. You think Russia's generals were gods of strategy, untouchable predators circling their prey? Think again. Flashback to the echo of Soviet parades, boots thudding on cobblestones like hammer blows, the sharp bite of frost air thick with fume-laden pride, where victories were celebrated before battles even roared. Yet, in those frozen memories, the underbelly festered, an officer corps crippled by generations of rigid Soviet ghosts, choking out fresh tactics. Why do they recycle outdated maneuvers, pinning hopes on hordes of mobilized masses scrambling over agile moves? The chronic weakness in Russia's non-commissioned ranks forms brittle chains, disconnecting elite strategists from frontline fighters, leaving orders hanging in the void. But wait. This outdated blueprint assumed Russia hunkering down on home turf against NATO, fusing armored troops in skies for air denial and enemy exhaustion. Instead, a steely top-down iron fist chains lower commanders, freezing tactical freedom and icy immobility. When the tide turns sour, these brittle lines shatter without adaptability, no quick pivot, no inspired counter. Launching offense into Ukraine exposed the flaw. Russia failed to claim the heavens, lacking the trained might and structure to soar. Ukraine's fortified layers turned the air fleet into idle shadows, gathering dust until Glide bombs erupted in 2024. Meanwhile, Ukraine honed edges with NATO since 2014, mastering nimble small unit dances through years of shared drills. Russian troops, facing fury or shifts, stiffen like statues, while Ukrainians twist, invent, prey on predictable patterns. Could one man's obsession blindside an empire? The deeper poison lurks in Putin's fortress of silence, built over 20 years to starve truth and crush voices of warning. He clung to the myth that Ukraine thrived only tethered to Russia, pouring it into his July 2021 manifesto on shared Slavic blood, a clarion call masking invasion drums. Relentlessly, he dismantled doors to accurate intel and rival views. Surrounded not by advisors but mirrors of his delusions, or cowards too terrified to challenge, he orchestrated catastrophic blind spots. Intelligence skewed into fantasies, fueling underestimations like the wished-for Crimean flip, ignoring Ukrainian defiance born from annexation scars and Cold Wars. Forgotten were the 1980s echoes. When Soviet superpower backs enabled triumphs, or patched pathways since Georgia 2008 sabotaged mobilization and supply arteries. No contingencies waited, dependent on hopeful delusions, trouble shattered illusions. Remember Hostomel Airport, that jagged scar near Kiev? Visions flood, the roar of helicopter blades slicing pre-dawn stillness, musk of aviation fuel stinging nostrils, rain-slicked tarmac vibrating under fevered plans. Russia hurled 200 to 300 special forces and 34 choppers from Belarus, eyeing rapid airport siege, a chokehold on Kiev. But Ukraine, with 200 conscripts from the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade, defended with small arms, anti-air tech, and grit. Shots echoed, downing 4 Mi-25s and an Mi-28, morale surging like a phoenix. Strips blocked with wreckage, foiling landings. Reinforcements vanished, 18 IL-76 transports with 1,000 troops reversed, exposed fatal flaws in warfare illusions.
Is this the cost of clinging to parades over preparedness?
Soldiers infected with HIV, hepatitis, armbands flashing biothreats, thrust into battles around Pokrovsk, a grim emblem of summer slaughters. Ukraine's Security and Cooperation Center's director, Dmytro Zhmylo, confirmed the horror. Around 16,000 Russian wounds since late August, slow stabs yielding nothing decisive.
Yet, Ukrainians reclaim villages, a glow of reclaimed lands in August sands turning October assaults.
Why drag tainted soldiers into this nightmare?
Humiliation mounts as Russia humiliates its own, a far cry from glory parades, an empire unraveling in its own trap. What unthinkable depths will Russia sink to next? When even diseased troops can't save the day? As Putin's grip tightens on lies and echoes of false security, will Ukraine's spark ignite the final unmasking, or will this cycle of rigid ruin drag on, crushing hope under the weight of buried truths? In a world of echoing halls and silent agreements, Vladimir Putin has walled himself off from any whisper of disagreement. Imagine the clammy grip of fear in a room where no one dares to speak truths that clash with his vision. For 2 long decades, he has crushed any voice rising against him. Surrounded by those who mirror his thoughts or tremble too much to oppose, this isolation birthed a colossal blunder in intelligence. Russian spies fed him fantasies, twisting facts to match his delusions. They painted Ukraine as a weak, eager ally, ready to embrace its northern neighbor without a fight.
But in the shadowy corridors of reality, Western eyes saw clearly.
In November 2021, CIA Chief William Burns journeyed to Moscow. He warned them bluntly against aggression. Then, in mid-January 2022, Burns went to Kiev. He shared raw intel with Ukrainian leader Vladimir Zelensky.
This gift allowed Ukraine to brace for the storm.
Ukrainian fighters knew about the hostile airport ambush.
They lay in wait, weapons poised.
Yet, Putin's insiders gave him illusions, not warnings. This bubble of yes-men doesn't just skew war plans.
It traps Russia in moves that harm its own core.
Early withdrawal could have dodged ruin. But admitting error? That's poison in Putin's realm.
This breeds lurking chaos within his circle. His power hangs on a handful elite security chiefs, military brass, oligarchs. They cling to him, fearing loss of fortunes or worse. But as the war grinds on, whispers of doubt creep in. What grisly weapons are soldiers forced to wield next? Could Putin's fortress of silence shatter from the inside out? The stench of decay wafts through military compounds, where armbands mark the infected warriors sent into battle. These men, carriers of deadly viruses, charge forward in a sickening ploy of terror. Executive Director of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center, Dmytro Zhmylo, confirms their presence. They fight in Pokrovsk's fiery crucible. If Moscow resorts to such depravity to keep pace, what's left in the tank? Around this eastern hub, 16,000 Russians lie dead or maimed since late August. Despite swarms of troops, gains crawl mockingly slow.
Ukrainian lines hold firm, repelling incursions and claiming villages back.
The air hums with artillery roars, the earth tremors under boot strikes.
Can a leader's unchallenged throne lead to empire's fall?
Feel the icy dread seeping through power's veins as failures stack like hidden wounds.
Pokrovsk's blood-soaked fields scream of Russia's flawed heart. Its doctrine, forged in old Cold War molds, falters against modern chaos. Not the military, but the FSB scripted this special operation.
Putin dreamed of a swift takeover in 10 days.
Parades blared victory hymns before battle. Spare parts? Forgotten in haste.
Captured plans show absurd optimism, no real battle maps, just marches assuming smooth welcomes.
History bites back now. The sharp crack of helicopter blades over hostile airport rings forgotten. In February 2022, Russia aimed for a bold grab. Helicopters ferried 200 to 300 operators from Belarus. Ukrainians, with 200 conscripts and outdated gear, fought back.
They downed 4 helicopters and MAI-28 and 3 MAI-17. Vehicles clogged runways, halting reinforcements. Troop transports circled but fled. This flop exposed rigid chains of command, where even sergeants can't adapt. Air superiority slipped away, glide bombs came late.
Ukraine's NATO-trained squads danced with innovation, turning tides. And the coup de grace? Putin's paranoid purge of dissent. For 20 years, he's silenced critics. His 2021 essay on Russian-Ukrainian unity foreshadowed invasion delusions. No one challenged his worldview. Ukraine is illegitimate without Moscow. Intelligence reports morphed into myths. Echo chambers drowned out CIA warnings. This isn't just bad info, it's enforced blindness. Orders fly against self-interest. Economic disasters loom, yet admitting mistakes means ruin for a system built on illusion. Uneasy alliances fray as mingle sense of impending collapse. Oligarchs shift in gilded chairs, palms sweating against ornate armrests. Cracks widen like fault lines in permafrost. Putin's grip on hundreds of elites tightens like a noose. They dread defying him. Wealth and lives hang in balance. But endless Ukraine quagmire breeds fear. Finances hemorrhage, drones whine endlessly. What if survival demands breaking ranks? The very mechanism of control creates inflexibility. Dissent's silence now haunts adaptability. As bodies pile and sanctions bite, elites muse, is loyalty a death pact? The hollow echo in Putin's chamber grows deafening. No voices countermand folly. Russia drained resources on a pipe dream of quick victory. And now, whispers turn to shouts of betrayal. Will the fortress crumble under its own weight? Or ignite a revolution from within? In the eerie silence of a leader's isolation, Vladimir Putin's domain suffocates under layers of unchallenged decree. Picture the cold marble floors echoing with forced approvals, where dissent feels like a distant phantom. For 20 grueling years, he's eradicated any opposing viewpoint. His inner sanctum echoes with ideological clones or terrified shadows too petrified to dissent. This womb of conformity unleashed a catastrophic blindness in Russian espionage. Intelligence reports became fictive narratives. Data warped to fuel Putin's mirage, a compliant Ukraine, arms outstretched in surrender. Yet, the West pierced the veil. In November 2021, CIA Director William Burns ventured to Moscow. He issued stark cautions against invasion. Mid-January 2022, Burns met Kiev's President Vladimir Zelensky. He unveiled raw intelligence on Russia's looming storm. This foresight armed Ukraine decisively. Ukrainian sentinels anticipated the hostile airport onslaught. They fortified with grit and crude defenses. In stark contrast, Putin's echo chamber fed him comfort lattes of fallacy. They whispered what appeased, not what endangered. This bubble transcends mere skewed data. It condemns Russia to choices sabotaging its own fate. A timely retreat might evade financial abyss. But confessing misjudgment evaporates in a system abhorring error. Such rigidity breeds volatile fractures in Moscow's core. Power rests on scant hundreds, security titans, military puppets, oligarch puppeteers. They orbit him, tethered by perks and dread. But prolonged carnage ignites private reckonings. Economies crumble, troops desert in the mud's grasp. The acrid bite of explosives lingers in air choked with despair. Diseased battalions charge, armbands signaling contagion, the ultimate psychological weapon. Dmitroj Milo, head of Ukraine's Security and Cooperation Center, validates their deployment in Pokrovsk's inferno. If desperation hallmarks Russia's strategy, how depleted is the arsenal? Around this pivotal Donbass stronghold, 16,000 Russians perished or suffered since late August. Swarm assaults yield meager footholds. Ukrainians repel them, recapturing hamlets with calculated fury. Artillery thunder drowns battlefield laments. Why does a tyrant's solitude spell doom for empires? Trace the shivering unease gripping elite circles as loyalty's facade erodes. Pokrovsk's mire epitomizes Russia's doctrinal rot. Antique paradigms clash with warfare's tempo shift. The FSB penned this special farce, not generals. Putin's delusion, conquer in 10 fleeting days. Premature parades trumpeted triumph. Logistics crumbled, spare parts absent in the rush. Seized maps reveal naivete, no engagement contingency, just utopian parades. Helicopter rotors' vengeful whine pierced hostile airports dawn.
February 2022's gamble unraveled swiftly.
34 choppers delivered 200 to 300 operatives from Belarus. Ukrainians countered with 200 recruits, wielding rifles and aged missiles. 4 fell, 1 Yak-138, 3 MAI-41-7s.
Runways jammed with debris stymied landings.
Reinforcements winged vainly before aborting. The debacle laid bare inflexible hierarchies, officers paralyzed without autonomy.
And looming darker, Putin's suppression spree.
Centuries of muzzle-eroded truth.
His July 2021 manifesto affirmed Ukrainian-Russian unity, invading delusions inked.
Courts silenced dissenters, purges ensured sycophancy. Intel morphed into propaganda. CIA alerts ignored in the Hall of Mirrors.
This enforced fiction stifles evolution.
Commands defy national interest. Retreat options vanished, sanctions impoverish. Yet error acknowledgement destabilizes the edifice. Sticky sweat beads on brows in opulent Kremlin suites, power's tremor palpable. Chairs creak under shifting weights of allegiance. Faults widen into abyssal chasms.
Putin's claw on hundreds of elites constricts fatally.
Fortunes and freedoms dangle by threads. Yet Ukraine's festering war stirs subterranean doubts. Defeats accumulate, coins dwindle. Adapt or perish, what if fidelity becomes suicide? Control's tool forges chains of immutability. Muted voices now block redemption. As costs soar, insiders ponder, does our steward champion or sap us? Putin's vacant chamber amplifies isolation's curse. No counterpoints temper madness. Resources squandered on illusory blitz. Now, betrayal murmurs crescendo. Will the citadel implode from digested poison? Or birth upheaval from betrayed loyalists? The regime's anti-germ warfare against debate might foster its terminal vulnerability, turning malleable elites into unforeseen insurgents. As economic ruin deepens, fear morphs into factional whispers. Those once bound by terror glimpse a truth too long censored. Is Putin the architect of his own unraveling?
Feel the pulse quicken in shadows where switches flip. The structure teeters, poised for a cascade of disillusionment that could sweep away the throne itself. And in this crucible, even the mightiest fortress risks crumbling, not from enemy's force, but from the rot within. What secrets unfold when the first oligarch flees the sinking ship? As the world watches the unfolding drama of warfare, one question lingers: is Russia's war machine running on empty? Recently, Mark Rutte, NATO's Secretary General, stepped into the spotlight to reveal shocking conclusions about Vladimir Putin's military ambitions. Standing in London, Rutte proclaimed that Russia's finances, troop strength, and strategic foresight were all dwindling. This isn't mere speculation, it reflects a significant downturn in Russia's military might. Initially, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, confident in its manpower and resources. Despite early setbacks, many thought Moscow would ultimately gain the upper hand through a war of attrition. But a shift is happening. Battlefield reports indicate that desperation is setting in. Just look at Pokrovsk, a vital logistical hub where Russian forces are still struggling to establish control. After yet another unsuccessful attempt to seize this city, a devastating narrative emerges: the war is gnawing at Russia from the inside out. In a striking twist, reports surfaced that Russian units deployed soldiers afflicted with diseases such as HIV and hepatitis into combat zones around Pokrovsk. This desperate tactic, designed to psychologically pressure Ukrainian defenders, speaks volumes about the lengths Russia is willing to go to keep its military apparatus moving. Ukrainian officials confirmed these toxins in combat, highlighting the dire shape of Russian forces. What does this mean for Russia's grand offensive? Despite committing vast numbers of troops to take Pokrovsk, the situation remains grim. Significant losses are reported: around 16,000 soldiers have been either killed or injured in that area alone. While Russians occasionally penetrate Ukrainian defenses, they meet fierce resistance, proving that Ukraine is not merely on the defensive but actively reclaiming territory. In a surprising turnaround, reports poured in about Ukraine regaining control of numerous villages in key regions. With skilled units like the 141st Mechanized Brigade launching successful assaults, it became clear Ukraine still has strategies up its sleeve, refusing to let Pokrovsk slip away easily. Yet, these battles on the ground reveal a deeper malaise within Russian military strategy itself. Shortcomings trace back to outdated doctrines and strategies that are no longer suited for modern warfare. Russia's military, led not by generals but by intelligence officials, underestimated the fierce national pride of Ukrainians. The prior success in previous conflicts cultivated unrealistic expectations for rapid victory in this invasion. Stunningly, failures during operations, like the disastrous attempt to seize an airport near Kiev, exposed critical flaws in strategic planning and battlefield execution. Rapid resistance at Hostomel Airport forced Russian forces to retreat, revealing their inability to adapt to changing dynamics. Looking to the future, one thing is clear: Russia's military fabric is fraying. The aging model rooted in Soviet strategies is facing fundamental challenges against a well-prepared and adaptive Ukrainian force. Distrust runs deep. As Putin's years of suppressing dissent have culminated in a dangerous disconnect from reality. This war, marked by desperate measures and tactical failures, hints at a more significant reckoning awaiting Russia's regime. As the players on this geopolitical chessboard reposition themselves, the stakes remain high. If Russia's economy falters and military spending continues to rise, could peace become the final nail in the coffin for a regime that thrives on conflict? The answer might lie in the winds of change blowing across the battlefield, where each move hosts a potential turning point in a story that seems far from over. Amidst the tumultuous tides of war, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte's recent address in London struck a surprising chord. He revealed that Vladimir Putin's Russia is depleting its finances, troops, and innovative strategies. These words herald a significant shift in the West's perception of Russia's military might and its waning influence. Initially, when the war began, Russia seemed poised to overpower Ukraine effortlessly. With ample manpower and resources, it was presumed that victory was inevitable. However, as the months rolled on, that assumption has begun to shatter. The battlefield reports pouring in suggest a bleak picture for the Russian military. Desperation is written all over their actions. The once formidable Russian war machine is now spiraling into a quagmire, weakened from within. Reports detail skirmishes around the critical city of Pokrovsk, where Russian forces have faced staggering setbacks. Despite relentless attempts to seize control of this vital logistical hub in eastern Donbass, months of combat yielded nothing but frustration. Russian troops have found themselves pushed back several miles, battered by Ukrainian artillery. This city has transformed into a symbol of Russian failures, a traitorous mirror reflecting their declining power. Moreover, shocking revelations surfaced about the state of Russian troops. Reports indicate that the military has resorted to deploying units composed of soldiers afflicted with severe diseases. These units, marked with warning armbands, are intended as a psychological tactic against Ukrainian defenders. Such desperation showcases the lengths Moscow will go to maintain its facade of strength. As of mid-September 2025, an estimated 16,000 Russian soldiers have sustained injuries or lost their lives around Pokrovsk. Ukraine's defenses have remained robust, turning the tide against the aggressors through perseverance and resilience. Not merely reactive, Ukrainian forces have started reclaiming territories, boasting successes in several villages. Simultaneously, they have begun conducting full-scale counteroffensives, catching Russian forces off guard time and again. The situation not only highlights the immediate battlefield realities but also illustrates the deeper issues plaguing Russia's military tactics and strategies. The Russian command structure, burdened by outdated doctrines and poor decision-making processes, has slowed its response to the rapidly evolving conflict. Gone are the days when sheer numbers could guarantee success. Adaptability is key, and Russia seems ill-prepared. The military strategy that Putin devised was marred by a fundamental misunderstanding of the conflict landscape. Hopes for rapid domination quickly eroded into chaos as desperate tactics fell flat against a well-prepared Ukrainian resistance. The evidence of this miscalculation lies starkly in the failed mission at Hostomel Airport, where Russian forces faced overwhelming opposition from Ukrainian troops. Instead of a grand assault, it devolved into one of Russia's most notable blunders. As the war grinds on, Putin faces mounting pressures, not just on the battlefield but from within Russia itself. Economic struggles threaten to curtail military funding dramatically, with estimates indicating a reduction of about $6.3 billion in the upcoming budget. Inflation could exacerbate these challenges further, pushing the regime to make difficult choices. The tides of war also bring unexpected alliances and shifts in power. Europe has emerged as a formidable ally for Ukraine, forming a coalition of 33 nations dedicated to military support and strengthening Ukraine's defenses. Discussions about sanctions on Russia have intensified, reflecting a collective intent to pressure the Kremlin and ensure lasting security for Ukraine. This newfound unity hinges largely on shifting European policies that break decades-long dependencies on Russian energy. The realization that reliance on Russian oil and gas grants Moscow leverage over European nations is catalyzing a shift in priorities. The chains of economic dependence are loosening, and with each passing day, support for Ukraine grows, solidifying Europe's resolve. As the drums of war continue to echo across the continent, the stage is set for evolving dynamics. The questions loom: how will Russia respond to increasing pressures? Can the coalition hold strong against the looming shadows of Russian desperation? The next chapters of this unfolding saga promise to hold even more surprises as the battle rages on. Imagine a world where Europe's iron grip on security shatters like fragile ice under the weight of ambition. Picture the deafening roar of engines as nations unite in defiance, their commitments clashing against Putin's crumbling vision. In the heart of a war-ravaged landscape, where the acrid stench of smoke lingers and the gritty texture of fear coats every soldier's skin, Russia's gamble implodes amid surging support and staggering losses. What if the very borders Putin seeks to redraw are now fortified by an unstoppable wave of alliances, turning his dreams into dust? Is this the bitter irony of a tyrant brought low by the solidarity he underestimated? As stunned analysts watch Europe awaken, whispers of a new dawn echo through battlefields stained with blood and betrayal. From London's hushed corridors, NATO's declaration reverberated like a thunderclap, exposing Russia's hollow facade. Mark Rutte's revelation that Putin teeters on the brink of bankruptcy ignited a firestorm of doubt. Troop shortages and dwindling ideas now claw at Moscow's core, a slow erosion mirroring Ukraine's relentless pushback. Yet, in this vortex of tension, a shocking twist emerges: Europe's awakening shatters illusions of division, weaponizing unity against the aggressor. How could one man's hubris blind him to the unbreakable bond forming across oceans and borders? The sharp sting of overlooked alliances pricks at the truth, forcing us to question: can a ghost of Soviet glory survive this seismic shift? Building on Europe's defiant surge against Russia's fading leverage. Where sanctions choke off vital lifelines and donations flow like lifeblood to Ukraine's defenders, Europe's resolve crystallizes into bold action, each nation forging steel from shared purpose. France and Britain exchanged solemn vows to extend nuclear shields over the continent, unshackling America's grip on vital stockpiles. The tactile hum of factories gearing up vibrates through the air, as Germany's pledge to hike spending to 5% of GDP, over 1.5% earmarked for resilient infrastructure, resonates like a rallying drumbeat. Romania's vision materializes in drones whirring into the skies for joint defense, while Denmark's blueprint invites Ukraine to erect arsenals within its secure borders. These moves, scented with the metallic tang of renewal, humiliate Putin's fractured predictions of European fracture. What unexpected betrayal haunts the tyrant's legacy now, as energy dependencies unravel into irrelevance? Can this humiliation twist the knife deeper, exposing flaws that doom even a hollow victory? Continuing from alliances that mock Putin's delusions, unveiling the EU's audacious leap toward a muscular standing army rivaling America's might, Putin's wager crumbles under the EU's feverish considerations for a standing army, matching US prowess in expenditure and readiness. Even victory for Russia looms as Pyrrhic, a specter indistinguishable from ruin. Over 1 million souls, counting the gravely wounded and fallen, bear witness to the cataclysmic toll, their echoes of anguish permeating Moscow's streets. Veterans return, bodies etched with invisible scars. The distant rumble of artillery forever etched in their minds. By mid-2025, nearly 140,000 Russian fighters have crossed back into civilian life, many haunted by post-traumatic stress, unleashing waves of unchecked brutality. By March, these tormented figures have claimed more than 750 lives within Russia, targeting kin and comrades in outbursts of repressed fury. The Defense Ministry grimly notes that every fifth veteran grapples with this affliction, their world a sensory maelstrom of echoing nightmares and splintering psyches. Why does this domestic carnage twist the invasion into a self-inflicted wound, begging the question? And what chilling revelation awaits, threatening to unravel the Kremlin's fragile hold? Imagine this: NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte steps up to microphones in bustling London, his voice echoing through tense air. What he unveils. A gut-wrenching revelation: the crimson tide of Russia's collapse is surging closer than anyone dared believe. Picture the stench of burnt metal and gunpowder hanging heavy over fog-shrouded trenches as Putin's machine grinds down. Back then, who could have predicted Vladimir Putin's empire would sputter, choking on its own ambitions? It began with bold charges, where Russia hurled troop after troop into the fray, believing sheer force would shatter. While Russia once boasted a powerful military legacy, the reality of its current operations reveals an alarming decline. The country's once formidable military strategy crumbled under the weight of its own miscalculations. In the early days of its military campaign, Russia projected confidence, expecting to assert control over Ukraine swiftly. However, the anticipated 10-day takeover turned into a prolonged and grueling conflict. At the center of this chaos was an operation targeting Hostomel Airport, just outside Kyiv. Russia had envisioned capturing this strategic hub and immediately airlifting reinforcements, launching a rapid advance into the Ukrainian capital. Instead, what unfolded was nothing short of a catastrophic failure. Relying on a contingent of 200 to 300 special operations forces flown in aboard 34 helicopters from Belarus, Russia underestimated the resolve of Ukraine. The Ukrainian defenders, just 200 strong, were not only prepared but strategically savvy. Armed with small arms and Soviet-era anti-aircraft systems, they executed a counter-response that no one could have predicted. The sounds of gunfire echoed as Ukrainian forces shot down 4 K-52 helicopters and an Mi-28, severely crippling the Russian assault and boosting their morale. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, Ukraine cleverly transformed the airstrip into a fortress, filling it with vehicles and wreckage, making it impossible for Russian reinforcements to land. When the first sign of resistance appeared, Russia faltered, abruptly abandoning what they had hoped to be a decisive move. The failure at the airport revealed deep-rooted structural issues within the Russian military, issues exacerbated by a generational disconnect from modern warfare tactics. The military's reliance on outdated doctrines proved catastrophic when faced with unexpected resistance. Ukraine had been honing its skills with NATO forces since 2014, focusing on adaptive tactics, while Russia remained entrenched in outdated methodologies. When faced with shifts on the battlefield, Russian troops struggled to adapt. The rigidity of their command structure stifled creativity and flexibility, leaving them vulnerable to the very strategies they had thought would ensure victory. This once unassailable military force had become a shadow of its former self, caught in a web of its own strategic failures. What does this mean for the future of the conflict? With Russia's missteps and Ukraine's determined resistance, the narrative of the war is being rewritten. The question looms: can Russia recover from such profound failures, or has it set itself on a path to inevitable defeat? The world watches as this saga unfolds, with lives, honor, and destiny hanging in the balance. Continuing from where we left off, war-torn veterans returning to Russia are grappling with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, leading to horrific outbursts of violence that have claimed over 750 lives, mostly among family and close acquaintances. According to Russia's defense ministry, estimates that 1 in 5 soldiers back home are battling these invisible wounds. Imagine this bone-chilling question slashing through the fog: what if the very warriors Putin sent to conquer Ukraine are now turning their rage inward, staining Russia's streets with the blood of their own kin, while desertion tears apart the army that was meant to be unstoppable? The metallic tang of despair hangs heavy in the air, as echoes of distant gunfire still ring in their ears, and the panicked grip of nightmares twists their hearts like barbed wire. Soldiers haunted by the thunderous booms and acrid smell of explosives are fleeing the battlefield in droves, their boots pounding with fear rather than aggression. By May of 2025, investigations reveal that at least 50,000 Russian troops have vanished through desertion, with projections soaring to an ultimate 70,000 by year's end, creating a chasm of betrayal that crumbles morale from within.
Can you feel the cold sweat of desperation as these fighters, once promised glory, now curse their fate under a crumbling regime?
Some, in a twisted bid for escape, fabricate crimes to land in prison, exchanging the hell of war for the cold iron of jail cells, knowing Ukrainian prisoner of war camps offer kinder treatment, sunlight instead of shadows,
and bowls of decent food over the stench of neglect. Isn't it shocking how soldiers would rather face the enemy and surrender than endure their own homeland's savage neglect?
This isn't just defeat, it's a soul-shattering humiliation for Moscow, where the fabric of loyalty frays like tattered uniforms under relentless assault. Picture the quiet dread as families clutch their wounded kin, the salty sting of tears mixing with the earthy scent of clandestine flights across borders.
Yet the agony spirals deeper, economic ruins compounding the chaos of bloodied battlefields.
More troops exit the army through abandonment and collapse, their spirits shattered beyond repair. Authorities boast that just over half of returned warriors scrape by with jobs, grueling shifts in security or manual toil, earning a paltry 40 to 60,000 rubles monthly, a fraction of the puffed-up military pay of 150,000 promised amid wartime lies.
How does one adjust to this gut-punching poverty after the adrenaline high, the touch of gold on their chests?
Unable, they rush back to re-enlist, lured by signing bonuses and injury payouts, trapped in a cycle where war feeds their wallets but devours their souls.
Have you ever wondered if this is the genius trap Putin unwittingly forged, a military caste addicted to conflict, their livelihoods dangling on the edge of endless blades, their futures locked in an inescapable vice?
It's a whirlpool of devastation, industries choking on self-inflicted competition and Western strangleholds, the economy militarizing further with each desperate gasp. Where peace feels like an hallucination in the haze of artillery smoke.
Could this seemingly unstoppable loop finally unravel Putin's iron grip, dissolving Russia's very essence into ash? As tensions mount, with each veteran's trembling hand reaching for a weapon born of trauma, the nation teeters on a precipice, begging the question, will internal fury ignite an even greater explosion, or is this the moment history flips the script on the invader?
The air grows thicker, charged with whispers of rebellion, as the weight of unseen scars presses down, leaving us breathless, yearning for the resolution that hovers just beyond the horizon. When NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte addressed reporters in London last week, his words unleashed a seismic tremor in Western minds. They painted Vladimir Putin's Russia as a crumbling colossus starved of funds, fighters, and fresh ideas.
Was this mere bravado? Or the brutal truth of a superpower spiraling into obscurity?
Imagine the guttural roar of artillery shells, splitting the air like thunderclaps, scattering dirt and despair across blood-soaked fields.
At war's dawn, Russia's legions surged forward with unyielding might. Manpower overflowed.
Resources gleamed. Industrial gears churned relentlessly. Ukraine seemed destined for swift submission.
Yet, initial gambits faltered like brittle bones under relentless blows.
Fast forward through 2023's attrition quagmire, where Russia clutched false victory's illusion. But battlefield whispers now shriek of desperation.
Russian troops, branded with armbands marking deadly ailments HIV, hepatitis, charge into Pokrovsk's inferno. Can you fathom the horror, crimson flags fluttering in disease-ridden dread, meant to sap Ukrainian resolve with moral rot?
This grotesque tactic haunts Pokrovsk, a logistical lifeline in eastern Donbass. Picture the acrid stench of cordite, mingling with sweat-drenched fear as Moscow's assaults grind against fortified wills.
16,000 Russian lives erased or maimed since late August. Gains creep, fractional. Yet, holes punctured in defenses, tiny breaches swarmed by 200 infiltrators yield only Pyrrhic bruises under counterpunches.
Ukraine counters with ferocious grace.
Villages reclaimed in August's surge. October unleashes the 141st Mechanized Brigade's wrath. 24 hamlets liberated.
Not vast conquests, but iron resolve punishing aggression.
Does this herald Russia's fatal crack? Twist, Pokrovsk's agony masks a vaster malaise. 40% of clashes erupt here, yet Russia's decay roots elsewhere. Military doctrine, fossilized in Soviet dogma, clashes brutally with modern chaos. Planned not by generals, but the FSB's spies. Putin foresaw a 10-day blitz, a special operation where Ukraine's factions would greet invaders with cheers. Echoes of Crimea lingered, where rapid seizures yielded swift gains.
But Ukraine's unity shattered illusions.
Resentment boiled from annexation's icy aftermath.
Russia's last major fray predated 2008. Georgian skirmishes demanded slim forces, dismantling mobilization webs.
IFRI's insights reveal wishful hubris, parades celebrated preemptive triumph, sans spares for prolonged strife. Captured maps expose folly. No attack plans.
Merely parade routes, evading imagined foes.
Why? FSB deluded by Ukraine's fractious past. Zelensky's era vanquished corruption's grip. Reality struck Hostomel Airport's debacle, Kiev's doorstep. Scattershot assault via 34 helicopters unleashed 200 to 300 elite raiders. Ukrainian conscripts, armed with Soviet relics, downed craft in fiery descents.
Vehicles clogging runways barred landings.
No reinforcements arrived.
This fiasco bears Russian flaws.
Generational shackles bind tactics. Reluctance to borrow NATO's adaptability. Mass mobilization triumphs predictability.
Undeveloped NCO chains fracture command.
Top-heavy hierarchies stifle innovation. Offensive voids, sans air dominance, left air fleets obsolete till glide bombs emerged in 2024. Ukraine, schooled by NATO since 2014, improvises with lethal flair. Truth simmers deeper still. Putin's iron grip choked divergence. 20 years cultivating loyalty through fear, command structures, oligarchs teeter on razor wires. Regime stranglehold bars betrayal, everything to forfeit. Whatever disrupts safety sparks rebellion. War's lengthening shadow, economy's hemorrhage, summon fractures.
Previous part chronicled Russia's military fossils, exposing doctrine's decay and battlefield blunders. Now, oligarchs and power players loom as hidden saboteurs. If fear grips their gilded cages, the acrid bite of sanctions chomping exports, Baltic ports barring shadow fleets lights, what might they dare?
Economic tides turn. EU's price cap strangling oil veins, revenues plunging anew.
Military industry's gears, forged in state veins, now grind mirror crises.
Dissent's erasure fortified control, yet strands the regime's agility.
Survival demands fresh maneuvers.
Without them, insiders eye Putin's throne, once protector, now peril. Could ousted leaders pivot Russia anew, offering West a facade of change? This regime shift may birth from war's fiscal abyss. 2025 defense outlays soar beyond 8% GDP. 40% federal spend mirroring Soviet Cold War peaks, rivaling Ukraine's NATO bounty.
Pre-war military claimed 22% budget.
Reforms boosted, taxes hiked, bridging gaps.
But cracks widen.
Oil gas titans empire erodes, once 50% revenue fountain.
2024 subsidies evaded bans. Diversified flows. Yet stagnation grips China, India's haggling siphons prices, duopoly ensnaring exports. Shadow fleets smuggle to fringes, even European shores.
Scrutiny mounts on buyers. Baltic access EU nations eye sanctions gaze. Poland-Ukraine border incident. Twist, as economic news tightens. Russia's essence phrase. Could the oligarchs' whispers topple a tyrant? Or will Putin's 20-year grip endure, even as resources evaporate? What if Ukraine's triumph ships global ripples?
Imagine a world where a superpower's dream of conquest crumbles into dust, not with a bang, but with the silent tick of desperation.
That's the reality unfolding in Ukraine. Is Vladimir Putin's Russia truly on the brink of collapse, sending warriors marked by death itself into battle? Last week, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte stunned reporters in London with his bold declaration.
He claimed Putin's regime is gasping for air, drained of funds, fighters, and fresh ideas. This wasn't mere political spin or blind hope. It exposed a grim truth: Russia's once feared military juggernaut is fading away, eaten alive by its own miscalculations. Picture the stench of defeat hanging in the air like stale smoke from abandoned weapons. In the war's early days, Russia seemed unstoppable, with endless soldiers, vast supplies, and factories churning out machines of war. Ukraine bent under the initial onslaught. Though Russia's bold plans fizzled quickly, by 2023, observers deemed Moscow the likely victor in this grueling stalemate. But now, whispers from the front lines are flipping the script. Desperate Russian tactics scream of a nation shredding itself. Can a force brought to its knees survive? Battlefield victories by Ukraine in recent months tell the tale. The air hums with artillery roars, and earth shakes under each strike. Russian troops tried for another entire year to seize Pokrovsk, that vital crossroads in eastern Donbass. Forced back miles, they now take cover from relentless Ukrainian shells. This bloody target, hammered for months in slaughter, epitomizes Russia's failed summer campaigns. And if you think it can't get darker, brace yourself. In mid-September 2025, the Telegraph revealed something horrifying. Units of soldiers infected with HIV, hepatitis, and other deadly illnesses spotted near Pokrovsk. Putin's army bans them with armbands signaling mortal peril, hurling them into fights to terrorize Ukrainian hearts and minds. Feel the chill of fear, diseased bodies clashing in the mud, breaths ragged with contagion. What madness drives a leader to weaponize illness? Dmytro Zhmylo, head of the Ukrainian Security and Cooperation Center, verified their presence in the fiercest Pokrovsk clashes. If this is Moscow's last gamble, their war machine is a hollow echo. Around Pokrovsk alone, roughly 16,000 Russian fighters slain or maimed since late August. Massive pushes yield minor gains, not the shatter of Ukrainian lines. Even when tiny squads of 200 Russians slipped past defenses into the city, Ukrainian troops held firm, decimating them. Blood soaks the cobblestones, the metallic tang of spilled iron fills the nostrils. But Ukraine strikes back hard. Villages reclaimed in August. In October, the 141st Mechanized Brigade launches bold counterattacks, snatching back 24 settlements. Territory shifts matter less than the message. Ukraine claws away, punishing Russian recklessness. Their stand feels personal, like a slap to an arrogant bully. Twists abound. Could this pivot mean Russia's unraveling? Yet, Pokrovsk absorbs 40% of the fighting, a vortex of agony. Root causes lie deeper, in Russia's flawed war doctrine and entangled alliances. Putin didn't plan this through military channels, but via the FSB, his intelligence shadows. A special operation, led by spies, not generals. Victory parades prepped before the first shot, flaunting false confidence to the globe. But maps seized from officers show no real threat assessment, just marches assuming no resistance. Why such naivety? The FSB bet on Ukraine's corrupt fractures welcoming Russians, mirroring Crimea's swift fall. The air buzzes with old resentments, like buried coals reigniting. 2 decades of enmity ignored. Past wars distant, like the Soviets' clashes in the 1980s, leaving Russia hungry for mobilization tactics. Georgia's 2008 romp falsely reassured them, dismantling full-scale readiness. Reality? Chaos, as seen at Hostomel Airport, near Kyiv. The plan: elite forces in 34 helicopters grab the strip, flood Kyiv with troops. But Ukraine's 200 conscripts defended with small arms, anti-aircraft missiles, and tank busters. They downed Ka-52s and an Mi-28, morale soaring amid the deafening whumps of explosions. Vehicles clogged the runway, blocking landings. Fuel scorches the senses, acrid smoke and burning metal. Reinforcements inbound on 18 Il-76s from Oblast never arrived, rerouted. Total breakdown exposed Russia's structural rot. Soviet-era mindsets clash with modern warfare, refusing change. NATO learns from battles. Russia recycles fixed scripts, banking on sheer numbers over smart maneuvers. Weak NCOs sever officer-troop bonds, rigid chains limit adaptability. Defaulting to defensive tactics against imagined NATO threats wasted them here. Ukraine. Seasoned by NATO training since 2014, improvised while Russians faltered. Odor of sweat and gunsmoke in trenches hints at innovation's edge. Deeper still, Putin's echo chamber blocked truths for 20 years. He clung to illusions of Ukrainian-Russia unity, penned in a 2021 essay, sparking invasion fantasies. Dissent crushed, info twisted. Now, as whispers turn to shouts, will Russia admit defeat? Failing air dominance crippled Russia, drones patrolling like predators.
Glide bombs worked by 2024, but too late. Ukraine's forces adapt, exploit. Infected units? A psychological knife. But what if their plague backfires, sapping Russia's soul? Economic pressures choke, supply lines fray.
Ukraine pushes harder, villages flipping like shifting sands.
Artillery thunders, earth erupting. Will Russia adapt or perish in its own poison fog? Rudder's words echo, running empty. Humiliation builds as battles bleed on. Unexpected twists loom, perhaps Crimea fractures next? Sensory tapestry of war, cries amid gunfire, mud clinging to boots, horizon ablaze. Is collapse imminent, or a ruse? Rhetoric sharpens anew, what if Putin's gamble unleashes worldwide reckoning? Napalm stench lingers, hope flickers in reclaimed lands.
The West watches, pulse racing. Russia's winter nears, with cracks deepening. Fighters weary, but Ukraine's steel shines through.
Twists unravel, desperate measures now expose weaknesses. Can a despot's empire endure the storm? Voices rise, questions multiply. Defiance meets decay. Destiny hangs. What revelations await?
Had drowned out their fears.
The moment the helicopters descended, chaos erupted in the sky.
With a steady hand, Ukrainian gunners targeted those airborne threats, shooting down multiple K-52 helicopters and disrupting the Russian advance. Smells of burnt metal mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air. Victory was within their grasp. Meanwhile, Russian commanders began to recognize their monumental mistake, their morale sinking deeper than the wreckage below.
As Ukrainian forces filled the airstrip with debris, it became a graveyard for their enemies' hopes. Lines of vehicles and wrecked aircraft rendered the once promising runway useless for reinforcements destined to join the fight. In the wake of unexpected resistance, shock replaced strategy in the Russian ranks.
The looming seriousness of this situation was palpable. What had been anticipated as an operational landmark turned into a tale of disgrace as Russia lost its nerve and retreated. Reports surged that transports filled with additional troops were en route from Pskov, yet none arrived at Hostomel, redirecting back to the shadows of their homeland. This failure was not just tactical, it flashed a warning light revealing a deeper malaise within the Russian military structure. Generational flaws rooted in outdated Soviet strategies collided with an inability to evolve. Unlike NATO, which adapted and learned from the battlefield, Russia clung stubbornly to unyielding strategies, ever recycling the past yet ever blind to its constraints.
As the curtain drew on Hostomel, questions loomed over Russia's approach to modern warfare.
With their plans in ruins, they were left exposing the cracks in a once mighty machine, clashing against a resilient spirit fortified by surprise and courage.
How does one recover from an oversight so fundamental?
The answers lie far beyond the battlefield, intricately laced within the very philosophy of war itself. In a chilling twist of fate, the scars of war are not only borne by the battlefield but also echo through the streets of Russia. As of March 2025, veterans returning home from the front lines are grappling with psychological wounds, leading to a startling rise in violence. An investigation reveals that more than 750 lives have been lost to the hands of these veterans, often claiming friends and family as their tragic victims. The Defense Ministry eerily estimates that 1 in 5 soldiers is battling post-traumatic stress disorder, a silent epidemic wreaking havoc in previously peaceful homes. The chapter of military despair continues as the crisis deepens. By May 2025, an alarming trend emerges, with at least 50,000 Russian soldiers choosing to desert their posts. Analysts predict this number could swell to 70,000 as the year folds into itself. Some disgraced soldiers, in a desperate bid to escape the horrors of combat, are even opting for self-imprisonment, resulting in criminal cases that bar them from future service. This horrifying reality underscores a monumental collapse in military morale. Soldiers now prefer captivity in Ukrainian prisons over the dire plight of serving their own nation. The economic ramifications are just as grim. Official reports suggest that only a little over half of the returning soldiers have found work, predominantly in security or arduous labor, earning a measly salary of 40 to 60,000 rubles a month. This meager income starkly contrasts the inflated military salaries of more than 150,000 rubles promised during the war. The veterans face harrowing adjustments amid a harsh economic landscape, drawing them back to the military for the lucrative pay and bonuses, trapping them in a vicious cycle. With industries stifled by internal strife and external sanctions, a grim reality looms: the war creates a dependency on military service. This dependency tightens the noose around the future of Russia, leading to an inevitable question: how far will this spiral of military reliance push the nation towards its own collapse? As the implications of a sustained war economy set in, the fate of Putin's regime and possibly the entirety of the Russian Federation hangs precariously in the balance. Will this downward spiral ultimately spell doom for a once mighty nation? The echoes of conflict reverberate, creating a haunting silence where hope once resided. The clock is ticking, and the world watches as the fabric of Russia begins to unravel.